All right, guys, so we continue on here on our Patreon channel about the Club of Rome, and I hope you'll find this very interesting. I found it interesting myself, just really putting this together, and I do believe this is a hijacked point there, and I just need to get to my right pages here. Let's see here. Um, All right, let's go. Let's start right here with this one here. My big, like I said, my biggest concern is that this is hijacked, and what often happens with such global scale initiatives is that technocrats and idealists propose systems to solve a problem. Elites empower brokers see a tool to centralize control. The original message becomes twisted into justification for surveillance, control, or coercion. What does that not ring a bell? Just think about Palantir, something that I did a in-depth video for you guys recently on. And Palantir, not only that, but there was one that Deborah Tavares brought out when she was showing that program now where they're putting out cameras all over the United States in cooperation to be able to watch over you as well. So so you got surveillance and control right there. Then the United Nations originally was about peacekeeping and now is critiqued for globalist overreach. But in one regards, though, how can it really be critiqued for global overreach? Because what are they really overreached on? They do nothing. They claim they're not able to do anything. Their UN peacekeeping troops there don't do anything. They're not keeping peace. They're a bunch of soldiers in blue hats that do absolutely nothing. And then you have NATO, the defensive alliance, involved in regime change. That's exactly what NATO has become. NATO has become the bully of the world. All those powers that come together, which once formed the alliance to be able to protect each other, now is a global arm that goes around subverting other nations, destroying them, like in the case of Iraq. They accused Saddam Hussein of having weapons of mass destruction. There was never no weapons of mass destruction, but if you remember who the cheerleader was, it was Netanyahu, of course. Netanyahu, the longest running prime minister in Israel, and for good reason. They wanted to make sure that they had someone to blow the horn, to sound the alarm out throughout the Middle East, which brings you back to the biblical aspect as well. Remember that little horn that raised up? Sounds more like the Netanyahu to me blowing his little horn. Then you have the environmentalism concern for nature, and that's exactly where the Club of Rome first began in 1973, officially 1972, going back into around 1968 when they first began to put this together. That's been leveraged now for carbon taxes, digital control. Now they want to control your digital footprint. In other words, you're a carbon based entity, kind of like the cows flatulate too much and everything, and they're causing the ozone layer to diminish. Really. Maybe it's all these multi-billionaires out there with their pollution, like that huge plant for lithium batteries and over in it's not China, it's one of those countries south of there. I forget exactly where it's at there, that is just totally decimating the entire planet and the region there and killing their employees as well. So the Club of Rome system thinking and calls for global coordination can easily be misused to justify top-down technocracy. No doubt. I mean, 100%, yes, they can do that. So, the question is now is what's next? Well, while the Club of Rome itself remains a think tank, its ideas have influenced the UN Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which critics say enable control over land use, food, and mobility. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? There again, like Charles Schwab says, you will own nothing and be happy. And then we have that famous video. Of course, some people say it's an overlay. You will eat the bugs and be happy. The World Economic Forum, styled governance. That's where that comes from. Resource managed utopianism. Climate emergency declarations that push for emergency powers, lockdowns like controls and digital ID systems. The digital car, digital everything, fingerprints. Now you have to have that to be able to travel. None of this in the limits of growth, but the groundwork, the assumption that only global coordination can save us, it was definitely laid there with the Club of Rome. So that's something that we have to consider as well. And then, of course, you have here who took over the narrative. That really comes down to a big question, too. Groups that have leveraged the club's foundational ideas include the World Economic Forum, the UN-backed initiatives, large financial institutions, the IMF, BIS, promotional ESG, scores of digital currencies, tech companies creating the infrastructure for smart control. These entities now push solutions that resemble technocratic control, not grassroots sustainability, which is exactly what it seemed to be that the Club of Rome more or less envisioned in the first part of their ideology behind this. So then we go on to many other issues too that are at hand. And of course, some of the ones that I wonder about are those conflicts that are happening in the world today, such as the Israel-India, excuse me, not Israel-India, but the India-Pakistan war. That's another one that we have to consider. And of course, who's been arming India in the first place? So I did a little research on that as well. Early cooperation began in the 1990s, although India recognized Israel in the 1950s. Formal diplomatic relations weren't established until 1992. Oh, wow, wonder who was in power then, right? Since then, Israel quickly became one of India's top defense partners, especially after India's 1999 Kargil war with Pakistan, where Israeli drone and surveillance support were critical. Arms sales and technology transfers, major systems sold or jointly developed included the Barak 8 surface-to-air missile system, and the naval land base, the Heron and Search UAVs for reconnaissance and surveillance, Spike anti-tank guided missiles, Falcon AWACS airborne early warning systems mounted on Russian aircraft, the ELM 2084 radar system, and let's see, India's Iron Dome style air defense. In fact, Israel just recently, before this latest situation happened, I saw an article in there where Israel was working with India to quickly get them some more air defense systems put in. And then, oddly enough, what do you know? We have Pakistan does this crazy maneuver there and causes mayhem inside of India. Now India is shooting rockets over into Pakistan, and Pakistan is now shooting rockets back in India. Yet it was that, there were some crazy radicals went in there and killed a bunch of people from India. But it all sounds like October the 7th all over again. Stage a scenario to be able to justify a war. And Israel's hands are definitely not clean when it comes to that issue. So that's another issue that really concerns me as well. And let's see here. So, in light of all this right here, we look at so many different war fronts that are happening, and that's what's got me really concerned as well. Today, this is some of the people that were originally involved in the Club of Rome 1973 original. These two guys here were original part of the two Club of Rome members of the 70 men that were part of that. I don't know what direction their real intent is going on now, but clearly we're seeing those wars that are shifting and shaping. Pakistan now vows retaliation after Indian strike over the tourist deaths. We see there. You have also Poland prepares for direct war with Russia. This article here from April 4th, 2025. I mean, this is becoming a very real scenario. And as I showed you clearly, right? Poland is definitely its own country when you look at this map right here. It is not, and it's way over here close to Germany. But according to the map of the Club of Rome, Poland right there in orange is no longer part of the European Union, but becomes part of the Russian territory, along with Latvia, Estonia, and several other nations in that group right there. So, but then we see this here, this article here in the Jamestown Eurasian Daily Monitor there, that Poland prepares for direct war with Russia. And why? If you remember, NATO had been moving all kinds of weapons into Poland until they made them the fifth largest military in the world. And yet they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper sack. And not only that, though, if you go back and you look at the map right here, Moldova and Romania both had been used to be able to help launch attacks on Russian troops inside of Ukraine while Russia is doing their invasion of Ukraine. And all that's a preemptive thing to begin with. It started with the island down here, moved into eastern Ukraine when Ukraine had their Maidan coup back in 2014. They overthrow Yanukovych there, send him into exile, and then they began to do all kinds of neo-Nazi type of terrorism on the eastern side of Ukraine. But after all, if you remember, Zelensky talks about helping to make this that greater Israel project. And of course, Menachem Schneerson also clearly decided that Ukraine would be Israel. After all, that is, the homeland of the modern day Ashkenazi Jews is mostly from Poland and Ukraine. Doesn't surprise me a bit in the world they've become part of the Russian Federation, especially since Eduardo Hudo said when he was coming back on a plane, and I think it was Rabinovich, I believe that was the guy's name he was flying with, who was the governor of one of the regions there inside of Ukraine, said that his cousin was coming into power into Russia. And he said, who's his cousin? He said, Vladimir Putin. Another good old Jewish boy there that got rid of, and oddly enough, my wife brought up this point here when I was telling her, I said, Putin was used to get rid of the liberal Jews inside of Russia and install the Chabad organization instead. And she said, well, it's the same thing happening in America. Donald Trump is being used to get rid of the liberal Jews in America and instead install the Noahide Chabad Jews of today. Well, that kind of brings us to another ideology that we'll consider here in just a moment. So there you go. NATO's response to Russian invasion of Ukraine. You have the proposed United States acquisition of Greenland, right? And not only Greenland, but as we know, Canada as well. And by the way, that was privately mentioned by the Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. What do you know? Publicly by President Donald Trump. So you see Rockefellers have their hands in on the idea of Greenland going to be a part of the United States. But you know what's really interesting, and this is something, now this is probably the craziest thing I'll ever say to you, but I just couldn't help but see at least a numerology idea. We know the great whore of Babylon, which is Israel. And how do you know it's Israel? Well, Jesus said it was Israel. Jesus didn't say it was Israel. He accused them of adultery. He called them serpents, a generation of serpents. Ezra accused the priest and the Levites of marrying in amongst the Nephilim races while they were in Babylon. That's why she's called the whore of Babylon. But when she comes out, now she sits on 7 heads or 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth there. You know, I look at that and I think of the 7 Noahide laws. And then, of course, the 10 horns, the 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as of yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And of course, who's the beast? Jesus tells you who the beast is. Should I just show you real quickly then? Let's see who the beast is. I think it's the most obvious thing we'll ever get to look at in biblical history because Jesus does identify a beast in the book of Matthew. Right? Let's see. What does he say? Fill you up the measure of your fathers. That's first off, right? What does he call them? You serpents, you generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? There it is right there. He compares them to a venomous beast. And by the way, the word beast in the scripture of Revelation is likened to a poisonous snake. So, these 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as of yet, because they hadn't been divided up into 10 regions of the world there, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Remember that odd statement that Trump made? This will be the last time you ever have to vote. Think about it. Whether or not the Club of Rome was an organization founded by elitists, that's conspiratorial, no doubt. But could it have been hijacked? I would say 100%. I'm Stephen Benoon. You're watching Israeli News Live on Patreon. Thank you, and thank you for your support.